Hello and welcome to the Divorced Dadvocate. I'm Jude Sandoval, your host, and I am very excited today. I'm always excited to have guests, but I'm particularly excited to have our guest today. I've been following him for a little over a year. He is a clinical psychologist here in my hometown of Denver, Colorado, and he is the author of several books, including The Tactical Guide to Women, How Men Can Manage Risk in Dating and Marriage, as well as a public speaker. He's spoken at the 21 convention on topics such as how to keep the wrong woman out of your life and fatherhood. He's got an excellent YouTube channel. And that's where I initially ran into him talking about the APA's guidance on toxic masculinity. Please welcome Dr. Shawn T. Smith. Shawn, thanks for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jude.
My pleasure. So let me just first ask, have you gotten a call from the APA yet?
No, they're not gonna talk to me. And I think for people who don't know, you're referring to probably a video where I really took to task their guidelines that they put out for working with boys and men, which is really a feminist screed is what that was. And I invited them to debate me on those, just to discuss it. We don't have to have a fight. It was going to be a polite discussion, but they have absolutely zero incentive to talk to somebody like me because their energy is better spent advancing their message in clinics and in classrooms. And I'm just a solo practitioner out in the world. They're not going to talk to me. I'm nothing and nobody to them.
Right. And our topic last week was rewriting of intersexual dynamics, and based upon a Harvard review article that was talking about a specific data point. That's what they like to do. So some of these social scientists, with taking a specific data point and then extrapolating, like you said, their idea of and their message of what they want and what ideology that they want to purport. And that was that men don't do enough housework. Was basically what it was. And, if you look at things over a broad spectrum of different data points and you factor all the things that go into being a family and a father and all of that, it comes down to most men and women, husbands and wives, work cooperatively together to figure out how that is. So, like you said, that philosophy is insidious in that it creates division. And maybe you can talk a little bit about, because we were chatting just a little bit before, many men that are listening, many fathers that are listening are going through right now a divorce. And a lot of them are questioning, well, what did I do wrong? Or is there a problem with me? And this happened. Maybe you can talk a little bit in that context about what they might be going through and about how masculinity is okay, and then maybe some ideas for how to sort through it.
Well, going through divorces, it's just a god-awful experience for anybody who goes through it. It's no picnic for women either, even though you and I were chatting a little bit earlier about how here in Denver and apparently everywhere in the country, women tend to have the advantage in terms of custody arrangements and financial arrangements, and men can really get raked over the coals. Yep. Women almost never get raked over the coals the way men do. It's a very biased system. And that system is bad enough if you get pulled into the divorce system where we have unaccountable attorneys that know how much money you have and how much money they can extract. You can hopefully avoid that by going to mediation and just skipping that whole process. But once you get drawn in, it's a god-awful process. And it's a particularly miserable experience if you're divorcing someone who's very difficult and God forbid she's a little bit personality disordered, narcissistic, or borderline or sociopathic. And it's very easy to fall into relationships with those people, male or female. And I was talking to somebody recently, a guy who's gone through that experience recently of divorcing somebody who's probably, I would have to guess she's on the borderline spectrum. And I suggested to him that this experience, it's like the experience of going through that for years on end, and it never really ends until the kids are sort of out and on their own and functioning well. Then you can sort of write them off and write off your ex and get away from them. But it's almost like just a half a step up from a prison camp in terms of the absolute try to watch my language here, the absolute mind screw that goes on from her and from the court system and from her using kids against you. And, you know, you're just constantly disoriented and back on your heels, and things are chaotic for years on end. And you don't know if you have any future financially. You don't know if you're going to be working till the day you die to pay off this mistake that you've made. And I'm losing myself here. Where did we start off with?
Yeah,
It's a terrible experience.
No, I can absolutely personally relate to that, because that pretty much describes my experience through divorce and with my ex and personality disorders, et cetera. Where we're getting to is just some, and that's a good point that you make, because how that makes us feel as men and anybody. I mean, we're talking about men in this situation because this is catered to men, but this works both ways, right? But you almost feel like you're crazy sometimes when you're going through this, and as in having a masculine nature of wanting things to be orderly and knowing what your next steps are. It is very chaotic. It is very unsettling. You have I had a ton of self-doubt, not understanding like what was wrong with me. And so I guess the question is, how do you mitigate some of that when you're going through this process, even if it's not as the extreme that I and some others may have been experiencing with, personality disordered individuals, and, basically writing the worst case of how to go through a divorce.
Well, I think one of the most important things any guy can do going through this is to not isolate. And it's the same advice I would have for somebody who's going through an abusive relationship, because in a sense, this is a very abusive situation when you're getting divorced. Even if she's being reasonable about it, you still have this court system that's nonsensical. And the family court system is not like the criminal court system, which itself has some problems, but this system is isolated. The judges and the attorneys are completely unaccountable. They basically have free reign to drain your coffers and do whatever they want and bring in whatever experts they want, including psychologists, to try to make the point that they're making. And it's a gaslighting experience all the way around. And so the point being that if you have your friends and your family around you, guys, there are a lot of guys out there who try to just soldier up and march through it on their own. That's actually a bit of a mistake, because then your mind starts talking to you and you can get a little separated from reality. Your friends and your colleagues and your even if you have to hire a psychologist or somebody to keep you connected to reality when you're going through that, and sort of keep you on your mission, because your mission can get really screwed up with this. You don't know if you have a future when you're in the middle of this.
Right. And definitely if you can afford to, and you can get the professional help to sort through it. And I always talk about a friend. I had a great friend who had gone through divorce, and God bless that I had him while I was there, but he had the worst advice ever in going through it. Oh, get out and date, and it's going to be fun. And, he was years down the road. He's like, you got to do this. And it was just terrible, but it was good to have somebody to talk to and say, hey, this is what I'm going through. This is what I'm feeling. And I'm just feeling, just somebody to pick up the phone. And that was great. At the minimum, if you can do that, if you can't get into therapy, if you can't afford a coach, also maybe some 12-step groups or some meetup groups or groups that will just help you to be able to talk about things. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I would say don't drink and talk about it.
Don't drink and talk. Yeah.
Those are two. Don't drink, and talk about it.
Okay. Yeah. And so in the first part of your book, and I wish I had your book when I got divorced, because while it's more geared about kind of post divorce dating. Well, at least in the context of any of the men that are listening, dating once you're divorced, that the first third of the book, or the half of the book, is really great practical advice around learning what your values are. And after a divorce and you're kind of going through this whole soul searching, would you agree that that's a good time to do some of the things that you profess doing in your book? And what are some of those things?
Well, the best time to do those things is before you ever
bring a
woman into your
life.
But
for those of us that aren't that smart.
Well, I wasn't, who's that smart? Because men don't get this kind of messaging. I think
Sure.
women are generally pretty good at talking to each other about the quality of the men that they bring into life, but we tend not to talk about it. And the reason I wrote this book is because I noticed early in my practice, nobody tells guys these things. And so some of the things, I wrote a book that is essentially about vetting women and choosing good relationships and choosing good women. And so part of what's in the book is what makes a woman capable of succeeding in a relationship. What are some bare minimum traits that a human being needs to have in order to get along with another human being in an intimate situation? But before I even get to that, the first third of the book is about knowing who you are, where you're going, why you get out of bed, what you're trying to accomplish in life, because it's a little different for men than it is for women. If you don't have those questions settled before you get into the relationship, then you're essentially relying on luck that you're going to bring the right person into your life, and a person who has a character and the values that fit with where you're going. And so that's why the first third of the book is let's figure you out first before we even talk about what kind of woman might fit into your world.
Right. And so, when we're in our 20s, how do we even determine those things?
Right. Yeah, the 20s is a tough time for guys. I don't know what your experience was, but being a young guy, late teens, early 20s, it sucks. It's just kind of a miserable experience if you don't have, like, I couldn't go into the military because I had some eye problems, but so I was rejected there, and then I was just sort of left wandering around like so many guys are I knew where I wanted to get, but I had no idea how to get there. No guidance, no structure, no nothing. And so when you're a young guy, you are expected, number one, to have your mission sorted out, and then number two, to be making big decisions about what the rest of your life is going to look like in terms of relationships. But those questions need to go in the proper order. You really can't figure out what kind of person is going to fit into your world if that's part of what you want to do with life until you know what your mission is. But when you're in your 20s, you don't know what your mission is for most guys.
Right.
And so there's these opposing pressures that, okay, figure out what you're going to do. And while you're doing that, make big decisions about marrying people and so forth. And I think that the pressure is a lot less these days for young guys to get married in their 20s. But
and then if we haven't done that, and then we get into relationships and then they fail, then we just basically push all of that off to, like, I'm in my 40s and trying to figure that out now, right? And then so what are some of those big questions that you should be asking yourself around, what is my vision and direction, and how do I narrow that down?
Well, the broadest way of looking at the question is, what are you going to do with your life? But that's a question that's almost impossible to tackle you remember in high school, people would ask you, what are you going to do with your life? And unless you are one of those lucky people who knows, I'm going to be a surgeon, and this is the path because my mother and my father was a surgeon, so I know exactly what I need to do to walk down this path. That's a pretty rare case. Most kids, when you watch kids, when somebody will ask them, what are you going to do after high school? And they get this look on their face of terror, like, I don't know, how am I supposed to figure that out? And so that's the broadest sense of the question. But while you're figuring that out, I think the smartest thing a guy can do is ask some specific questions about the big domains of values. So like children, money, sex, religion, where do I fall into those things? And then things like physical health. How important is that to me that I take care of my body? Because if it's important to me that I'm at the gym 3 times a week, or I'm doing jiu-jitsu or whatever it is, and this is going to be a lifestyle choice of mine, well, it's not going to work very well if I'm with somebody who has no interest in that, and they would rather, they have different interests. They have a big social life, or they are into movies or whatever. So, getting in touch with those basic questions of what's your day-to-day life look like, but then the bigger questions of, the big 4, like religion, money, sex, children, family, that sort of thing. But then also, when you're a young guy or when you're a guy in your 40s and you haven't sorted this out yet, that really the most logical strategy is just to pick a direction and start moving. Pick a direction that is closer to your values than where you are right now, and start taking some steps. And you'll get there by successive approximations.
Right. So let's talk about that for a second, because I think there's a lot of confusion around, and you might read that a lot in some of these self-help books, new age self-help books. Like, thinking about what you want, and then that's the direction your life will move automatically. And that's not really how it works. You really got to create this vision and direction, and then start acting it. Start behaving that way, and then your life will follow. And it might not necessarily follow exactly in the vision and direction that you're moving, but you're going to start making progress. Am I correct?
That's been my observation.
You're the clinical psychologist that knows this stuff. So I'm just some knucklehead that's been falling down and getting up and trying to figure this out. So and you talk in your book about all the philosophy behind this too.
Well, and I don't have any particular insight any more than any other guy. I just happen to, I've read a lot of research, and I have some clinical methodology that I learned, some ways of approaching problems, and I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of guys. So that's where it comes from. I don't have any magical knowledge, but you quickly reach a point of diminishing returns in thinking about what you're going to do. You obviously have to think about what you're going to do, but there comes a point where, okay, thinking time is over, because now you're just spinning your wheels, and let's start moving in a direction, even if it's not perfect. It's better than where you are.
Yeah. Well, and that's good too, because it feels like, in my experience, sometimes my personal experience, as well as with other men, is that we've got to think through all this stuff and think until we've got it all figured out. And just sometimes, particularly in the middle of a divorce where it's chaotic and we don't know what the outcome is, we need to start moving in the direction that we want to move, and define what our feelings are. Number one, work through that, and then what our needs are, and then start working towards needs. Would you, for instance, I want to have a good co-parenting relationship with my ex, and this is how I can go about doing that, and then start taking those steps.
Yeah, guys can certainly get stuck in paralysis by analysis.
Right, exactly. So, let's see. Let's talk a little bit about, let's shift gears a little bit then, so that we can talk about this toxic masculinity in society in general, and a little bit about what the APA has come out with, and the APA being the American Psychological Association. The challenge and the fear that I see right now is that we are getting some of this orthodoxy codified into family law, into places like the APA, which can potentially support family law in the courts, and that in the future this is only going to serve as a huge problem for men, and particularly young boys, because young boys are going to be faced with this coming up through their upbringing, and then having to face it in the dating world and the marriage world, et cetera. Talk to me a little bit about this, the toxic masculinity, the potential for this codifying, and what we can do about it.
Well, I don't know, Jude. You seem like a pretty toxically masculine guy yourself.
Yeah,
shouldn't be.
With my all my striped shirts and everything, right?
Yeah. Well, so toxic masculinity, the way it comes out of postmodern philosophy, and the identity politics that have been brewing on campus for the last 40, 50 years. Maybe more closer to 40 years, but the way the American Psychological Association defines toxic masculinity is basically masculinity is toxic. So they've picked some words like aggression, stoicism, competitiveness, and there's one more word that they really like to describe masculinity. And then those things are pinned to all of us, but just the dark side of it. So for example, let's take stoicism. Stoicism, not the philosophy, but stoicism, the behavior of containing your emotions. So having the ability to contain your emotions is a really useful thing for men and women. So we're not just emotionally exploding all over the place all the time. We contain our emotions. Now that's a very useful skill. It can go too far. So, excuse me, goes too far when a guy is containing his emotions so much that he's unwilling to discuss them with anybody. He's unwilling really even to think about them and try to make sense of his emotions. And so maybe in order to escape something that he has been taught or has learned is an aversive thing that he should not be looking at, his own emotions. So maybe he turns to alcohol or something because that turns off this thing that he is not supposed to be attending to. So that would be the dark side of Stoicism, for example. So we have this behavior that has a whole range of specific behaviors within it. Some are useful in certain contexts, some are not useful in certain contexts. Some are useful all the time, some are not useful all the time. I guess, I don't know. But what the APA has done is taken traits like this and only looked at the dark side of these traits and then mashed them all together and said, this is what masculinity is. Masculinity is the dark side of all of these traits, forgetting the light side and forgetting the fact that women also, in the example of Stoicism, need to be able to contain their emotions. And so Stoicism really isn't a masculine trait. It's something that both genders need to be able to do. It tends to cluster a little more around the masculine. Okay, fair enough. You can say that, and that's a reasonable thing to say. But to say that it's always bad, it's always dark, it always leads to negative outcomes is really a stupid thing to say. Because what would the world look like if none of us were containing our emotions? We are mostly containing our emotions most of the time. That's mostly what we do. So they've taken these ideas and it comes out of this postmodern idea that views the world through power structures and group politics and identity politics and people being pitted against each other and radical feminism. That's what a lot of radical feminism is. It's identity politics and it's I'm going to get power at your expense because I view the world as you getting power at my expense, which I don't think that's how the world works, but that's how radical feminism sees the world. Right. So then they take this idea that these behaviors that are destructive, they are masculinity. And they also come out of the postmodern philosophy, which says that, well, nothing is really real. It's all socially constructed. So masculinity must be socially constructed. We don't worry about genetics. We don't worry about hormones. We don't worry about those little differences in brain structures. And they're small, but the difference between a female brain and a male brain, you can find some physical differences. We're going to ignore all of that. And we're going to say masculinity, this god-awful thing that creates all the problems in the world, it's socially constructed. So us being brilliant, enlightened, academic psychologists, we can rewrite masculinity and create a better world. And this goes back to the Marxist notion that humanity can be perfected, which is whatever. Maybe you believe that, but that's the sort of the philosophical foundations of it is that Marxist idea. And so there's a very long explanation, but these APA guidelines that you mentioned are the exercise of trying to rewrite masculinity and make the world a better place.
Okay, so that was going to be my question: is why this movement towards this? Because you hear all kinds of speculation around it, and you just basically answered a little bit. Is that it's just a philosophy that this is going to make the world better if we can make men different? Correct? Right. Is that what you're telling me?
That's the mission, and they even say that. They don't say it in the guidelines, but in the piece in the APA Monitor that introduced the guidelines, the APA Monitor is sort of like the trade magazine of psychologists. They say essentially, if we can reshape, there's no reason we can't reshape masculinity, redefine it, and make the world a better place. Not in those exact words, because I don't remember the exact words, but that is the message.
Which is pretty scary, if you ask me, because this is not based on any kind of science, is it?
No, it's based on ideology. And there are lots of studies that they point to, but the studies are ideological in nature too. And this is one of the tricky things about a set of guidelines like they've come out to. They have hundreds of references in the back, and they're not all ideological. I would say most of them are not, but the ones that really count, the ones that really count toward the philosophical foundation of these guidelines are very ideological in nature. And what they've done is they've taken some aspect of some part of male behavior and they've applied this postmodern lens to it with an agenda in mind as they were conducting the study. But who's going to go through this besides somebody like me who's a geek? Who's going to go through and look at these studies, go to the back of the guidelines, look at the references, read all the titles, look, dissect the ones that are clearly part of the philosophical foundation, and go look at the stats and the numbers and the way they constructed this. Nobody's going to do that. And so these guidelines, the real danger of these guidelines is that they are used in the accreditation process. And the APA is the single most, they might be the only real accrediting agency that matters in the United States for psychology training programs. And it really does matter because employers look for APA accreditation, students look for APA accreditation. So if you're a program and you don't have accreditation, you're really looked at as kind of a sketchy organization. So it's a tremendous amount of power in these guidelines, and that's where they will enact these guidelines. They will teach the therapist to buy into this philosophy and then force the philosophy onto their patients.
Right. And then let's take it a step further, because then these patients are divorced fathers, their children, they're going through a PRE or they're getting an evaluation done, and they're going to courts, and the lives of these individuals and these children are being impacted by what's being said in these reports. And then that has a lifetime effect on these children and these individual and the parents and the fathers that are going through this. And that's not good for society in general if you're skewing this to trying to change an entire outcome working backwards from this philosophy.
Absolutely. And that's what it is, working backwards from a philosophy. And it has those very deleterious, destructive effects on the forensic side. Forensic just means the legal intersection of the intersection of law and psychology, so which is what you're talking about. And so it has that effect there, but it also finds its way into couples therapy, where we're not anywhere near the law at this point, but you have a couples therapist who has been indoctrinated into this ideology. And let's be very clear, this is ideological indoctrination is what the APA is engaged in. They do other things too, but this is part of the mission, is an ideological indoctrination. And so you have a couple that's gone to therapy, and they have sort of a run-of-the-mill problem with maybe he's retreating from conflict and she's pursuing. That's probably one of the most common problems that you see in couples, is they need to be discussing something. The more he tries to get away from it, the more she tries to pursue, which makes him run away further, which makes her pursue further, and then they're just in this retreat pursuit patterns. So this is something very common. If you've been indoctrinated into this ideology, you're going to approach him as the problem. You're not going to be identifying that pattern as the problem, and that pattern is very easy to deal with, but you're going to be identifying him as the problem. And you're going to be saying, well, you need to be more accommodating because you're being toxically masculine, you're being stoic, you're being aggressive, you're doing all of this. And the problem with that is that when you have a pattern that's co-created between two people, I guess that's redundant, is co-created.
Yeah.
And you put all the blame on one person, you've really done tremendous damage to that relationship, because for a number of reasons. But it's as destructive to absolve one person entirely of their responsibility for a pattern as it is to blame the other person entirely for the pattern. It's equally destructive in different ways. And so this indoctrination, there is no good outcome for it.
Right.
So on the legal side or the non-legal side.
Right. Sorry, and so this is sort of come full circle to what we started with when we're going through divorce and going, God, am I crazy? Like, how do you mitigate this? How do you stay true? And I know for me, it had to be like going through all of this, and at every juncture, just feeling like I continually have got to fight against whatever it was I was coming up against, and trusting that what I felt deep down inside was the right way to go, the right thing to do for my children. So, any other tips on, other than just trusting your, I guess you hear motherly instinct all the time, your fatherly instinct about what you need to do and how you need to do it, and go for it.
Yeah, well, you guys are often not trained to listen to their intuition. And my stance on intuition is the stance that was put forth I think in the 90s by a researcher named Matthew Lieberman, which is that intuition is information processing that is happening at a nonverbal level. So what the theory is that we have verbal information processing, which is what we're doing right now, and then we have all this information that comes in from the world, and it's filtered in our brains literally through a structure called the reticular activating system, and it part of what it does is decide what information goes up to the verbal level. It doesn't do it by itself. I don't know that anybody completely understands a very complex system, but we do have information that goes up to the verbal level and then information that stays at a nonverbal level. And that information gets processed too, but it doesn't get processed verbally. And so I think I found that a really useful way for guys to think about intuition, particularly if they're sort of scientifically minded, is that it's just information processing. And the way your intuition, the way your brain talks to you when it's not talking to you verbally is through physical sensations and even dreams and anxieties and tension and irritability and crabbiness and depression. That's a lot of times your mind talking to you about there's something going on. And so the way to approach that intuition is to stop and go for a walk with a cigar or do some journaling or do whatever it is that helps you bring information to a verbal level, and just ask yourself, okay, what is my brain trying to tell me here? Maybe it's got a point, maybe it doesn't, but I'm going to at least look at it.
Right. And that's why in the beginning, when you said, like, don't date anybody else, don't drink, try to take away, try to remove as many distractions or things that you might be doing that aren't allowing you to really tune into what it is you need to tune into in order to go through this process. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And that's where your buddies if you have buddies that can talk to you, that's where your buddies really come in handy, because if they're good friends, they'll tell you when you're full of shit. They'll tell you when you're missing something. They'll tell you when you're right. They'll give you a little love when you need it, and they'll give you a little slap down when you need it. And that's that's a good thing to have in your life.
Right. Or call Shawn and schedule an appointment, and you'll do that. Well, not necessarily in those terms, but you'll help them to come to that realization and understand that. I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I can, as a coach, say that stuff maybe a little more directly.
No, I can say it directly. My only hesitation was I'm just full up right now, so don't call me.
Okay.
I just don't have any room. But I was speaking.
That's a good problem to have.
If a psychologist isn't speaking to you very directly, doesn't mean unkind. It just means direct. And so the psychologist isn't doing his job if he's not speaking directly.
Absolutely. So, Shawn, tell us where we can find you online. I think you're on Twitter and YouTube and everywhere else, and how we might support you. Christmas time is here. Maybe buy a book on Amazon. You can find it on Amazon. Tell us how we can support you as well.
Yeah, well, if you want to buy the book for a friend or for yourself, it's everywhere the books are. It's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and everywhere else. But as far as where to find me, I'm on Twitter @IronShrink is my handle, and I have a website, DocSmith.co, where I guess everything about me that's relevant is there.
Awesome. Well, I sincerely appreciate you being here, and I appreciate all that you put out there. Your videos are fantastic. I love watching them. They add some humor into topics that I don't necessarily always understand. So it makes it understandable for knuckleheads like myself. And so I appreciate all you're doing for the men and women out there. And we look forward to talking again soon.
All right. Well, thanks, Jude. It's good to see you.
All right. Take care.